Hello to all of those who have joined a little bit early for today's webinar with MSC, GlobeScan, Costco, and Whole Foods. It's a great lineup. We'll pause as I see the numbers of participants rising rapidly, so please stand by. Welcome everyone to those of you who have joined already for today's webinar hosted by Marine Stewardship Council, GlobeScan, with special guests from Costco and Whole Foods. I continue to see the numbers of participants rising, so we'll wait about one more minute before we get underway. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with Marine Stewardship Council, GlobeScan, Costco, and Whole Foods. What a great group. My name is Eric Wan. I'm director at GlobeScan, and I will be your facilitator and moderator today. We are at a fascinating inflection point in the times of our history. What a fascinating time to be doing consumer opinion research. And that's what we've been doing. We do a lot of that at GlobeScan, not exclusively. GlobeScan is an insights and strategy consultancy focused on sustainability, trust, and corporate reputation. We are advisors, and we're really thrilled to have been working with the Marine Stewardship Council for at least the last 4 years on really understanding the consumer landscape and what is moving the marketplace, especially from a sustainable fishery perspective. So I'm here with our panelists, and we've got a great lineup today. Today, the focus is really on where the hell are we after this crazy year. And we had some fortunate timing in that early in the year before COVID really blew up. We did some detailed research globally with Marine Stewardship Council. And then afterwards in June, GlobeScan did some of its own research. So we're here to share that. And we are very thankful for Marine Stewardship Council in being willing to share and contribute to this very complex conversation we're having worldwide on what is the future of sustainable consumer behavior what's changing. I think we haven't seen a period of behavior change that's been more profound this year than perhaps in decades. So we're fascinated to be able to explore that, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today. Our agenda is we'll do a welcome introduction with our fabulous panelists at Costco and Whole Foods. We will share for the first time in the first of 3 webinars some of the insights and trends we found in the global consumer research we've done with Marine Stewardship Council. Then we will share some relevant findings from an ongoing research program looking into behavior change that's led by GlobeScan called the Healthy and Sustainable Living Survey. That's a study across 27 countries. We'll pause intermittently for questions directed at our great panelists. And we will be taking Q&A from the audience, which is in the hundreds today from all over the world. That said, our focus is on North America. We will be doing additional webinars over the next few days that will focus on other time zones so that everyone doesn't have to do this in the middle of the night, which is kind of a nice thing. We encourage you to submit Q&A throughout the meeting through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We are active on Twitter with hashtag GlobeScan, and also my handles MSC Bluefish and at GlobeScan. So to our introductions, again, my name is Eric Wan. I'm a director at GlobeScan on the left. There I am aquatically oriented. I do a lot of sailing here on Lake Ontario. We have Kristen Stevens, our host from MSC, who's Senior Marketing Manager in the US team. We have Wes Rose, who is VP of Seafood Merchandising at Whole Foods. And both of those two are on the Northwest coast in the US. And then we have Tanette Lim, who's responsible sourcing at Costco Wholesale, who is on the East Coast. So we're coast to coast with me in the middle on Lake Ontario. And so let's get underway sharing some of the findings from MSC's bespoke research that we've been doing with them over the past 4 years, 2016, 2018, and 2020. And the first slide I want to show is just a little bit about the methodology. So this is very robust consumer research using online panels. We have really rich sample sizes in North America, which will be our focus today. We're looking at the general public, but we're zoomed in on seafood consumers specifically, which in the study number more than 4,000. We have some global context as well, and we'll share that because that's relevant. North America is unique in a couple of ways that we'll look at. The first is what is on people's minds. So we ask a question of consumers globally, which, if any, of the potential environmental issues are you most worried about? So where is the anxiety coming from? And climate change is clearly top across the 23 country set of people we interviewed. Pollution, waste, and damage to riparian ecosystems is number 2. Air pollution is there. Extreme weather event is there. But all the way down, where a third of people say they're most worried about the health of oceans and the decline of fish populations, that's where today's topic will focus. So that's kind of the global context. We know that 2020 was supposed to be the year of COP26 and getting to the next chapter in the UNFCCC process. We had the Commission on Biological Diversity, CBD, and Kunming. All of those were postponed. But these issues are still resonating with people. And one of the things I want you to take away from this presentation is that the Sustainable Development Agenda has not evaporated in the face of COVID. If anything, it's more dynamic, more prescient, more relevant for people worldwide. So there's no need to hide for us who are working on sustainable development. and we need to carry on. But it has changed the dynamic a little bit. If we go to North America and look at the findings from the same question, just among Canadians and Americans, we see an increase in the ranking of the perceived seriousness of the health of oceans and decline in fish populations. So this is a very salient topic for folks in North America. When you engage consumers on these issues, you will have their ear. There's opportunity. And that's kind of a notable difference. One of the things that makes North America stand out from the global average. For example, if we break this down by country, this is the extent, again, to which people see and feel worried about a range of different environmental issues. And we just look at the health of oceans. We see that North America is about 3 points more concerned and worried than the global average. And you can see the little arrows there where we see that 40% of Canadians pick the health of oceans as a big issue for them, and 34% of Americans. So generally we'll see a pattern where Canadians are a little bit more engaged on this, but Americans have not tuned out either. A reminder that these data were collected pre-COVID, so during February and March, and later we'll share some of our more recent consumer research. We do see some interesting patterns here where lots of coastal countries, so like Spain's big seafood place and Japan, are a little bit opposed on their perceived worry about the health of oceans. But there is an interesting variation across this set of geographies. I will note that there's a lot of detail here, and we will share the slides and the recording of this session with everybody who's attending today. So don't worry about taking pictures or grabbing tons of notes, because you will have them all. Next up is when we asked about ocean issues specifically, just ocean issues, and we asked, what are you most concerned about the oceans? And here we're looking at the top 3 and comparing changes back to 2018. And we see this increase in worry about pollution, particularly plastics. And as we all have felt, this has been a very powerful dynamic, and I think an eye-opening lesson in how to mobilize consumers around environmental and social issues too, with really compelling imagery, photography, data, stories, mobilization, advocacy, and also leadership from companies who are trying to tackle the plastics challenge. And people are in tune with that and quite supportive of what various organizations will do in that space. Overfishing, depletion of fish species, we haven't seen an increase there that's material, but it still resonates with folks. Maybe feels a little, 2000-ish. We haven't talked a lot about it. The plastics conversation has consumed a lot of the oxygen in the room, but it's still there. And climate change is also in the top 3 of people's concerns about dangers to the oceans as well. And that's very much increased over the past 2 years, up 10 points, in fact. So what does all this mean for consumer perceptions and how they involve themselves in food and diet? So I always like to think that food is a wonderful laboratory for understanding sustainable consumption, because it's what people put in them as opposed to on them or what's around them. So this is really important and fascinating work, and we'll learn a lot from it. What these concerns that I've outlined have resulted in is a sense of 58% believe that in order to save the ocean, we have to consume seafood from only sustainable sources. So that means MSC and Whole Foods and Costco are doing really important work in this space, and we're looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that. And there's another attitude here that's concerning as well, that there are 30% of people in North America who think that their favorite fish species won't be available to eat 20 years from now. 47% disagree with that, but 24% are on the fence and don't really have a good sense of that, which makes for a majority if you add that to the 29%. So I want to pause here and go to our panelists, starting with Wes. What do these initial findings suggest to you, Wes, in what you need to do to engage consumers and be successful in the seafood market?
Yeah, it's about awareness, and it's been a big focus of ours for a number of years, is just bringing that awareness and giving transparency in labeling and helping people make really good decisions, right? So our approach has always been that, right? We're armed with great information about our shopper and what they're looking for, and so we've taken that knowledge and we've expanded and continue to expand our assortment when it comes to sustainable seafood. And with that, we see our shoppers respond favorably, and that just right, it's the flywheel, and it continues. We continue to go deeper and deeper on that front. And so, right, like it is a balance, because there's a need to also remain competitive and have opportunities for all shoppers, right, to purchase sustainable seafood. So to have sustainable options that are available at all kind of price points for folks, and making it as easy as possible for everyone to come in to our shop and say, I can make a choice here, and I know that choice is a good choice, right? Without having to read a lot of labels, to think too deeply about it. It's really, trying to make it as easy as possible for our consumer to make that positive choice.
Wes, and we'll see some findings from the research that touch very directly on that. Tanette, let's go to you. What's your take on this? Do you have any builds on Wes's comments?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Wes, and it's very similar for us. And I think a lot of retailers are also taking that stand to provide more products to consumers, make it more available, communicate, what are the sustainability stories around all of that. I think one area also that Costco does a lot of work on is engaging with suppliers. So a lot of our suppliers we have long-standing relationships with, and we take to heart having had that relationship for a number of years, working with them so that they can transform themselves, the fisheries that they work with, into shifting towards sustainable sourcing. So you obviously have, those early adapters, right? Those people who, easily transition into that. And then there are those who are a little bit of a laggard and need a little bit of push. And I think that's also an area that we work with. We work with our vendors, our suppliers, so that we make the business case for them to continue to make that change.
Yeah, great, Tanette. And of course, you learned a lot with the work you did with meat, probably beforehand. And great to see it being transferred over to seafood as well. We have a lot of data to get through. A reminder to please submit any questions or thoughts you have through the Q&A function, and that we will share the slides afterward as soon as the recording is available. The next finding I want to share is the actions that people have taken to protect fish and seafood over the past year, and compare that to what people say they might do in the next year. And as usual, we see this action versus intention gap in many, but not all places. So 20% of people are saying they've switched to a brand or product that says it helps to protect oceans and fish, and this is North America again. 37%, so a big gap, say they would like to do that in the next year. However, there is less of a gap between action and intention on the extent to which people say they've reduced the amount of fish and seafood they eat. So that's interesting to me, and any thoughts or comments about that from the audience would be useful to hear, and maybe Kristen might chime in too. There are changes in species preference, but also an intention to do that further. And there's an appetite for information, as we'll see in more detail coming up, using the apps and the guides to understand what's a sustainable source or a sustainable species or variety of fish. And then very much fewer people say they have stopped eating seafoods completely, but still a 5-point gap in the percentage of people who say they plan to. So it's very much an active conversation with consumers. Many people are thinking about this stuff. And we see it reflected here, where 88% of North Americans say they want better information about fish so they can stop buying unsustainable fish or seafood products. But that's a big number, right? Everyone loves more information. Getting people to act on it is the hard part. But there's a role for companies here too. It's not all about civil society or governments. 70% say they would like to hear more from companies about the sustainability of their fish and seafood products. And 63% are into supply chain issues tonight, as we talked about. They want to know where the fish they buy can be tracked back to a known and trusted source, read a sustainable source. So there are lots of implications in these inclinations among the general public and North Americans. And this gets really interesting too, and gets specific down to retailers. So these are some attitudes about eco-labels specifically. And 2/3 of folks say that supermarkets and brands' claims about sustainability should be clearly labeled by independent organizations. So that's 2/3. I notice eco-labeled products when shopping. 25% of people say they see it. Maybe this says we need more prominent marks on the packs. But look at the difference between the overall North American population in total versus younger generations who are aged 18 to 34. And we are seeing this year, more than we ever have in a quarter century of doing global consumer research, that there are generational patterns and shifts and gaps that are usually quite linear, ranging from a more engaged and troubled young Gen Z group all the way through up to the boomers. So we will take a little bit of a look more at that, but the younger folks, which really are a proxy for the future marketplace, are really worth paying attention to, and we're doing a bunch of work in that space with some of our partners, which we will make public and you can watch out for. So what drives purchase choice when it comes to purchasing seafood? There's a pretty standard way of doing this. We can say, how important are each of these different product attributes to you, and get people to rate them. And you know what happens? They all say, everything's important. I want it all. And so we use a technique of trade-offs in our research methodology called maximum differentiation, where we take a randomized set of usually about 5 different product attributes, and we say, what's most important in this set of 5 and what's least important? And you can see on the right of this screen the set of product attributes. We tested, some are kind of tier 1 purchase drivers like quality, price, taste, those sorts of things, and others are sometimes called tier 2 around things that relate to sustainability and sourcing, certifications, and those kinds of things. And the hierarchy breaks out for North America like this. So in blue, we see the conventional purchase motivators. So yeah, it's safety is a big deal in seafood, right? We all know that. Taste and freshness are important. Fresh is related to safety and taste. And health. 2020 is the year of health. We've never seen health in our research being so important to people, and that's for obvious reasons. However, sustainable sourcing and being environmentally friendly in the decision set for seafood in terms of a rank order is up from 10th place in 2018 to 6th place in 2020. And that was pre-pandemic again, but is indicative of, I think, a changing food landscape for folks as we start to talk about regenerative, sustainable, food security, all of those things. And our sense is that the pandemic has only accentuated that. So what about awareness of the MSC logo? 27% of the general population recall seeing the MSC label when we show them or name it in the survey. But this is up to 32% when we talk to seafood consumers specifically, which we know is the majority makeup of the sample. And again, another big age difference here where 46% of 18 to 34-year-olds have recall of the MSC mark. So again, this to me is a signal of a changing marketplace. Trust in the MSC logo is also up compared to 2018. We're up to 72% in 2020, so a 7% increase. So that's a good sign, Kristen, for Marine Stewardship Council. And changes in seafood consumption have been interesting too, and we wanted to understand a little bit more. So we asked people, compared to 5 years ago, how has the amount of fish and seafood you eat changed? And a third say they eat more, and a smaller amount say they eat less. 50% almost say that hasn't changed. So the trend is towards more fish than less fish. And here are the reasons why. So we take the people who said they increased their consumption of fish over the last 5 years, and we asked them pick the most important reasons for that. And we see health replacing red meats. So that's an encouraging from a global footprint point of view. And also cooking more meals at home. Again, this is pre-pandemic for many places, not all, not Asia, for example. And then for the reasons for decrease, we get to some more economic, but also environmental issues. So the cost of fish, declining fish populations, and concern about the effects of fishing on the ocean. So a little bit of tension in the dynamics that are driving changes in consumer behavior here. And then if we look at this by age specifically, on the top row, we see reasons for increase in consumption of fish, and that's interesting. And health and diet are more important for older people, whereas cooking at home and being independent is more important for young people in terms of motivating increased fish consumption. But in terms of the decrease, we see for younger people that cost and a concern about declining fish stocks are the most important reasons for younger people to have reduced their consumption of fish. Questions now for Kristen in particular. What do these insights about younger generations mean for you? How are you responding? How is MSC engaging? And then if we could have really brief comments from Tanette and Wes too, to see their experience and understand what's happening with this sort of trend towards flexitarianism with younger people.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So for the MSC, this younger generation is still a really receptive group to tap. So that while they do eat less fish, we do see that they're concerned about declining fish stocks, and they're concerned about the ocean. They also tend to be more eco-label aware, like we saw, and they're willing to pay more for fish from a certified sustainable fishery. And they're more likely to take action and vote with their wallets to help the ocean. So that's really promising. And they want to support brands that align with their values. So for us, this means that we're actively engaging and targeting this group and educating them further, because we also know they're a very influential group and rising in the marketplace. And I would also say, this group, it's clear that they do need reassurance that when they're choosing a product that they aren't doing harm. So for example, we know they're pretty discerning. So we can't just say it's sustainable, trust us, but saying things like, there's a third-party verification, there's an independent verification of the claims can be really helpful in engaging them. And then also, particularly in our marketing efforts, we're seeing how can we give them the option to dig kind of a second layer deeper. So they understand kind of the impact, the positive impact their sustainable choice is having on the ocean, and kind of close that loop and connect them to the cause.
That's great. And Tinette, what are you seeing in the aisles of Costco? Are you seeing some demographic dynamics that are?
I think well, the typical Costco, or the majority of the Costco shopper, our members are, mostly families. You don't buy a 3-pack for one person. So it's usually families. They shop for their families. So there is there is a niche. There is a certain group of people who consistently buy in sustainable or products with a sustainability story to it. We're seeing also there's some growth in alternative proteins. I think that's industry wide. Everybody is seeing that. But there is also like a balance between the cost of the product versus the sustainability story. I think you had in an earlier slide where, you want all of this, but you might not necessarily want to pay for all of it. So it's always a balance to kind of find that right mix. But I think just in general for Costco, how we buy, we always want to do the right thing. And I think like my earlier comment, we want to work with our supply chain, work with our suppliers to shift them towards more sustainable sourcing if they're not there yet. And then, provide that market access and we have our members vote with their purchasing power. So the more people buy a certain product, then that's what we will have more of, right? And so, but in general, for all our products, our intent is to get it to the point where it is sustainable. The more products there are in the future, then the business, we have business in the future. Everybody has products to sell. So I think it's just in everybody's interest to be more sustainable.
Great, that's exciting. And Wes, what's your take on that? Slightly different demographic, probably. What are you seeing?
I think we see a lot of the same patterns, honestly. But I think one of the things that we have, the growing online marketplace and pickup and delivery of, I think that's an area where we're really trying to bring that same level of information and transparency and trust to, because that's, I think, an area that we see that kind of growing younger population. Maybe they're not, in our store as frequently, but they are shopping online. And so that's we really have to lean into and make sure that we are giving our customer as close to an in-store experience as possible. One of our advantages, right, having our service cases in all of our stores the way that we do, is that there are team members that are trained, right, that understand the MSC, they understand the Seafood Watch program, and they're able to speak to our customers about what that means and what the different logos that they see within our department. And so that's our challenge today, is how do we then take that and put it online as well? And so, for us, it's all ultimately, right, like we just continue to have to build awareness, build the trust, and then, once they do that, right, the fish will speak for itself.
Neat. And a quick follow-up question. In a lot of the research we do, where we look at barriers to sustainable consumption, we see this notion of the price premium persisting as an obstacle to behavior change, or at least choice change. How is Whole Foods wrestling with that challenge? Because there's a sense that the era of the sustainability premium is kind of done in some ways.
Yeah, can't say I disagree too much with that approach, right? We are just trying to be as competitive as we can, right? Like if there's for the same quality of product, right? That's our focus, is to really close that gap as much as possible. to make it. And so it doesn't have to be a 1-for-1, right? But it has to be where it's within an acceptable range for people to be able to make that next leap up, right? Where maybe there's something that has a yellow rating from Monterey Bay, and then there's this next level up to the MSC, and it's $1 more expensive or something like that, where they can make that easy step up the ladder. We try to really focus our pricing on those ladders so that they can move their way up, and as people become, they spend more time in there, they build more trust, and they understand what they want to, how they want to contribute, they can continue to move up the ladder.
Cool, that's great, and in some ways sustainability is very correlated with a sense of quality, right? And MSC lends credibility to that, we know. So changing gears here a bit briefly, and then we'll get to a Q&A session and discussion with our panelists. Reminder that the MSC study that we did, the third that we've done since 2016, we did our data collection in February and March, and the whole world wasn't yet in a pandemic at that stage. And I think March 13th stands out in a lot of our minds as sort of a turning point, at least it does for mine in Canada. And we have been doing an annual study on healthy and sustainable living, which looks at what does that mean to people. It's a bit of a construct, but we know it's a market driver. And then how do we mobilize behavior change behind that in ways that builds trust for brands, closer consumer relationships, and also drives change to get to the 2030 where we need to have a big change in the demand side. And so we postponed that study a little bit just to try to get over the shock that COVID was providing to the system. And we delayed our data collection in 27 countries. It's a sample of 27,000 people, also done online. This is a big study. We delayed it to June. And so I want to share, just to wrap up, a few of the findings that we learned from that study. And again, we call it the Healthy and Sustainable Living Consumer Insights Program. So the latest is, and the inevitable starting point of that study was to understand the extent to which people who were taking this survey had been personally affected by three big things, right? They're obviously COVID, right? So at that point in June, 2/3 of people say they had been at least moderately affected by COVID. That may be kind of an underreported number, I don't know. And we compared that to the economic impacts, which were then beginning to surface, where we see that 58% of people in North America said they've been at least moderately affected, 24% greatly. So this is a big deal, of course, we know that. And then we compared it to climate change, and we see that, doing the math, about half of people had felt that climate change has at least moderately affected them, and 18% greatly. So that means climate change is real and it hasn't gone away. And if we rank the perceived seriousness of global issues in North America, we asked about a lot of them. We put COVID on there, of course, and that came out tops. We had been tracking the perceived seriousness of the spread of human diseases for a couple of decades, and that turned out to come out at number 2. But here we have climate change as the third highest ranking issue, followed by depletion of natural resources. So you'll recall that I mentioned 2020, the year of climate, the year of biodiversity. And here we see that even in June, these issues are still very much at the top of the public's agenda. So these will be important to follow on with, and everybody on this call has a role in that, and especially Marine Stewardship Council in driving more sustainable oceans, for sure. And you can see the rank order here. There's lots of detail, but what's interesting is a little bit of the time series on some of these top issues across 17 countries. So this is global data, it's not North American only. And from 2014, we see a trend upward, almost a new sustainability wave that we had been tracking all the way from 2014. around these environmental issues that we've been tracking. We see some slight declines in 2020 in June, but not a falling off the cliff of people's engagement and interest and worry around these environmental issues. So climate change still ranks fourth when we just look at our tracking countries, with COVID at the top and biodiversity still up there as well. So it's been an emotional year and consumers are a little bit conflicted. What we have seen in our June research is kind of an accentuation of the way people are feeling around environmental and social issues. So up 6 points from 2019, the percentage of people who say they've been trying to improve their health and well-being is up to 83%. The percentage of people in North America who say they want to reduce the impact that they personally have on the environment is up by 10 points. The extent to which people are feeling guilty is up by even more, 12 points from 2019. And then we have this finding on the right, whereas this very much gets at this sense of conflict and tension internally, where 43% of people, up 16 points from 2019, feel that what is good for them is not good for the environment, right? So that it's those trade-offs in decision-making that are, I think, hitting deeply within consumers. So there's some tension there that needs to be managed and resolved, and I think maybe addressed quite explicitly. And I think it's pretty raw and emotional for lots of folks when you think about, yeah, I'm not traveling to work, I'm not commuting, but I'm using tons of hygiene products and plastic packaging and all of that. So it's an interesting and dynamic time for sure. And the way we engage and mobilize on the back of COVID, I think will be pretty vital for the future of sustainable consumption. So what about that behavior change question? Since 1999, we've been asking a question of people worldwide, whether they have rewarded companies or considered rewarding companies for their behavior as responsible corporate citizens. And we phrase it as either buying the products or advocating for the company to others. And we've been stuck. For 20 decades, we've been stuck. We've gone from 27% of people who rewarded companies for good behavior in the past year to 31%. Not enough change. But we feel like we're on the threshold of something bigger, because in light blue along the top of this histogram, you see that we've gone from 21% of people who have considered rewarding companies up to 38%. So almost doubling that kind of inclination or will or wish to reward companies in that way. So that's, I think, some potential to unlock. In some ways it feels like we're on the edge of a tipping point, and maybe we pick that up anecdotally in our day-to-day lives as individuals. But there is an inclination there that's just waiting to be tapped for companies with sustainable products and services to offer. When it comes down to food specifically, we asked a question about meat, to meat eaters only. And we said, given everything's equal, taste, nutrition, cost, would you prefer a plant-based alternative or real meat from animals? And across 27 countries, the finding was shocking. 43%, fully 43% said they would prefer plant-based food. That amazed me. I didn't think it would be that high. In North America, it's not that high, but still 30% of people say they would prefer plant-based alternative if all things equal. So why is that? 40% of people say that reason is for health purposes. There's a 20% segment of folks that are most motivated by ethical treatment of animals. There are 13% of people who say it's about cost, and only 10% of people say it's environmental. And there's a larger 16% segment of folks who say, forget about it. Nothing would make me change my meat consumption. So I think this is an instructive in where the land-based protein diet markets are likely to head. We've seen tremendous growth and investment from the likes of Maple Leaf Foods and other brands who are having some really good success with plant-based foods. So that, I suppose that begs the question: what does that mean for the seafood industry? So let's maybe pause there briefly and get Wes's comments on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have a lot to share at this point. I think it's early days in that regard. I think it's something that we have to keep a very close watch on, right, to understand where the consumer demand goes. It's clear what it's done on the meat side in the growth of those meat alternatives, and it's just starting on the seafood front. But I think it'll rapidly increase, right? And we need to keep that in mind as we go forward.
Great. Kristen, your thoughts? How does MS... Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, one of the things that we think about is it's clear that consumers need more information on seafood as a really positive choice for the environment, that it is not the same as land-based meats in terms of the impact. So while MSD, we talk primarily or only about environmental sustainability, really looking at seafood more holistically, it's quite a good protein choice for seafood consumers. So I think it's really just a lot more education that needs to be done.
Good. And we'll go here, which is the hierarchy of purchase drivers, again, for food in general and drinks as well. And this is just for North America, and we'll wrap with this one and go to a conversation. But again, taste and price are still key. And in North America, it's a bit more of a challenging market. Environmental factors are lower, and ingredients and health are pretty moderate. And packaging is up there too. And with that, I'd love to go to a conversation with panelists, and we'll take some Q&A as we have the conversation. But my question to all of you is, what have you seen change in the past year? How has consumer behavior changed during the pandemic, and what does that mean for the future? What will be long lasting? What is short lived? And how do we make the best of this? Where is the silver lining? So Tinette, let's start with you.
Silver lining. I think what COVID has done is it has, as you can see from your research, has intensified the climate change, the biodiversity issue. We're in this situation right now because of some things that have happened, apparently. And so it's just made people more aware that we are all in the same planet and we're all in the same boat. I also think that because people are more at home, there's more time to be online, and people are reading more, researching more, and having the opportunity to kind of educate themselves a little bit more. Whether that translates to a significant shift in consumer practices and what they buy, it's a little bit hard to say that right now. I've asked some of my colleagues here in Costco, and it's hard because there is a scarcity issue in terms of supply because of COVID. And so we can't really tell right now whether it's because that they want the product and they need it, or that they want this more sustainable product because they believe it's the right thing. So I think right now it's a little bit too early, but it's very hopeful. I am hopeful that people are becoming more educated and are paying more attention to climate change, to healthy oceans, and sustainability in general.
Great, Wes, your thoughts, and then Kristen.
Yeah, it's agree a lot with Tonette on that. There's a lot that is there's a lot of impact in the short term. It's been a wild 8 months, and one of the challenges, right, as we're in the midst of it all, is that there's a ton of noise, right, in the data. So it's hard to really suss out 100% how people are thinking. The stock up behaviors. There's less frequent in-store shops, right? There's less frequent shopping in general, right? Just bigger shops, and so. But it does feel, right, anecdotally, that the foundation remains the same, right? Like, and people are still committed to making a difference, right? And they show that with what they are purchasing, even in these, even during stock up. Across the store, right? They continue to outside of seafood, right? Looking for organic, non-GMO, looking at sustainable seafood, looking at plant-based, right? All of those things have been really big drivers. So obviously that there is, environmental attributes remain a priority. And then there's also there is the price component, which showed up there quite a bit. And that becomes more and more relevant, right? As the pandemic carries on, and, what the recession looks like and how that impacts people's ability to, buy seafood in general, and also make those right choices, right? Where it's a very real impact to their livelihood. And so I think it's, continuing to offer that broad assortment, gives us some hope that we can maintain people in seafood and maintain them in, purchasing sustainable seafood. I will say, like, a silver lining of it all is we've been really impressed on just, right, people aren't going out to eat, but they still want to eat seafood, right? So they're taking that and they're buying it in our store in a way that wasn't, in February, it wasn't like that, right? And so that's been great to see some of those transitions. Things that you would traditionally have out at a restaurant, like lobster or halibut or whole fish, have done really well, right? As well as things like frozen products where people are stocking up. So one of the biggest barriers has always been around cooking, right? And people feeling comfortable with, like, hey, I'm going to spend this money on seafood and I'm going to ruin it, and that's not something I want to do, so I'll just go out to eat and have it, right? So I think those barriers are hopefully dropping, right? As we see people coming at home and having that experience and coming back and having a good experience. So I'm hopeful, right, that translates. And as, COVID subsides and life gets back to normal, people are like, hey, I can cook this wide range of sustainable seafood products at home and have a great experience. And they're going to save a ton of money compared to going out to eat every day, right? And so that's my silver lining for sure.
Cool. And you touched on a question from the audience. Philip asked, how about the price differentials? When will prices equalize for sustainable products? And glad that we got some comments in on that. Thanks, Wes. Kristen, how are you feeling? Are there any differences in uptake of MSC certification among your partners that you felt over the past year in North America?
Yeah, I mean, certainly seen a lot of trends that I think are long lasting in people's concerns about the environment increasing. Even the fact that consumers now have seen kind of the very real and tangible effects of climate change in the past year. I mean, we've had extreme weather events in the US and Canada, the fires as well, that, swept the nation and filled our lungs. And I think what's people are realizing, if there's a connection between the deep blue oceans and the environment, and their own human health as well, their own health, and that planetary health and human health are really interlinked. And realizing too that their everyday actions can actually make an impact on the environment. So I guess long story short is that accelerating concerns about the climate and other environmental issues really help raise awareness of broader environmental issues like overfishing, et cetera. So I've definitely seen that trend rising, and I expect it to continue in the next years.
Great, Kristen, thanks. We're fortunate to have people on this call who are very close to the supply chain. And so Moises asks, have you seen a reduction of supply of seafood due to COVID?
Happy to jump in. No, honestly, it's I think, right, it's been with restaurants, right, their volume represented a huge chunk of seafood consumption in the United States. With that, being virtually turned off for a very long period of time and greatly reduced, we haven't seen a huge impact to supply. I would say that the number one impact that we've seen is to transportation. Air freight was extremely challenging. It remains challenging. It got more expensive. It remains more expensive. Truck freight continues to get more expensive. So things like that are impacting the supply chain. But I would say the availability of seafood remains really high.
Yeah, I would echo what Wes said. And I think one of the things that we've had to do is to kind of pivot, being able to take, product that maybe is packaged or prepared more for the restaurant industry, to convert that so that it's more retail friendly. So the supply is there, but maybe not necessarily in the form that consumers are used to. And like Wes said, it's more the transportation side. I think it's the movement of the supply chain because of, borders are closed. They can't transport product from one country to the other. So it's more that, but whether the seafood is there, it's there. It's just we can't get to it.
Got a couple of questions from the audience around communications, and specifically for you, Tanette, and for Wes. How do you go about your communication on ASC, so Aquaculture Stewardship Council and Marine Stewardship Council certifications and sustainable sourcing and fishing? Any lessons to be learned from those experiences?
Yeah, and if I can comment. So the typical way is to have an eco label, right? So you have the MSC or ASC or any other certification standard on the product. But, as I've seen some of the comments, they'll say, there's not enough retail space on a packaging that to make that always available. And so it's kind of limiting there. The way, and because the way Costco operates, we try to be as efficient as we can. And that's how we can get the best prices, right? So we don't always, it's not going to be always on pack. Sometimes it's going to be on our website. If you go to our sustainability site, we don't do a lot of marketing. Again, part of our efficiency model to try to remove some of the extras to get a better value for our members. So there's a downside to that, obviously. Not all information is readily available to members, and we're trying to work with to try and improve that. But yeah, so it's just that off-pack we do have on our website. If you just go to Costco.com, scroll to the bottom, there's a sustainability commitment part over there, and you'll see it. And that's where we typically communicate our policies, our practices, and things like that.
So that's interesting. Scroll to the bottom.
Scroll to the bottom. There is a sustainability commitment link. The other way that we do it is also through the Costco connection. So we have our own kind of magazine that's shared with all of our members, and we put a lot of our stories there. We spend more time and even share some of the stories from our suppliers directly about what they're doing, what their experience has been.
That's great commentary, because Andrew asked, should there be more off-pack messaging about retailers' seafood policies regarding certification instead of just using logos? So Kristen, could you bring your point of view to bear on that question?
Yeah, so what we've seen be most effective for partners is when it really is a kind of a two-pronged approach, where there is a label on packaging and there is some simple point of choice messaging too. Even just a little bit of additional messaging at point of sale or online when you're buying can make a big difference in helping consumers feel good about their purchase. So yeah, it's definitely important to kind of marry up those efforts to help people shop their values.
Yeah, good. Werner asks, how do you explain that the ranking of concerns for global issues do not track with the recent voting patterns in the US election? And I'll just say that we don't do political polling at GlobeScan. So we won't go there, and we'll leave that to your imagination, Werner, but thank you for the question. As we get to the top of the hour here, I'd love to hear thoughts from all three of our great panelists, and especially host Kristen, on the question: if you would have to implement one new impactful action early next year to increase the consumption of sustainable seafood at your company, what would that be? Wes.
Boy, put me on the spot there, huh? Let's see.
Well, what do you want to do? Not what you will do. What would you love to do next year?
You know, I think it is about how do you communicate it all, right? Like I think if we had the ability, right, we'd have a broader way of messaging all of this great stuff that we're doing, right? We have some video boards, we have our website, we have all these things that we do, but if we could really invest, heavily on that front, right, and really bring to life the producer stories, the people that we, the companies that we're working with that are making a difference, and tying it all together, and having that be content that is refreshed and updated on a very regular basis, so it's not just background noise, or it's just not just a picture on the wall in one of our stores. That would be, I think, the most beneficial place. But it's we're competing with the entire grocery store at that point. It can't get all the attention of marketing as much as I try.
You're doing well, Tanette.
Completely agree, Wesley. Retail space is at a premium, and we have to compete with everybody. I work with all of the different commodities, and all of the commodities have to compete against each other. Plus, you have to compete with non-sustainability information being put in front of members. But to your point, to your question specifically, what's something that we can do? One of the things that we're working on right now that we already have started is that increased transparency, and how do we make that more available to people? And like Wes said, it's just making that communication be more readily available to members and consumers so that they can make more informed decisions.
Right on. Power of knowledge. That's great. Kristen, to you for the last word, and then I'll wrap it up. We are at the top of the hour. Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's really important for consumers is to understand that, address their primary concerns about health, and combine that with their concerns about the environment. So I think the real brilliance in messaging is when you can tell someone you can make a choice that's not only good for you, but for example, good for the ocean too, by choosing sustainable seafood. So to me, all these insights today tell me that that's really what we need to focus on. That again, that planetary health and human health are interlinked, and people don't have to feel guilty. They can make a really good choice that's win-win. So that's what I say is kind of the most important message to lead with and move forward with going into 2021.
Awesome, everyone. Kristen, thank you so much for convening. Wes, thank you for your contribution and great ideas. Tanette, I'm so appreciative of you bringing your perspective. To everyone in the audience, thanks for tuning in. We hope this was useful. The data and a recording will be made available to you via an email from GlobeScan. Thank you to our technical host, Robin Miller, who leads GlobeScan's communications, and to Alia on our team, who did all the heavy lifting to make this event possible. So with that, I'll say good afternoon and good morning for those of you on the West Coast. Have a good evening, and enjoy some sustainable fish for dinner. Goodbye.